Good morning, Vietnam. Good morning, everybody. Please take seats. Last call for caffeine and the like, and we will kick off the morning session. Buenos dias. Good morning. My name is Ed Rowland. I'm from America. I'm here to help you. I'm just kidding. I'm delighted to once again be invited to help out with the Nicholas Hall European OTC Conference here in Barcelona. A couple of housekeeping announcements before we start. Gentle reminder that noon is checkout for everybody, so if you need to take care of that during the breaks, please do so. Also, in your packets are the evaluation forms. We're going to be a perfect 10 this next 45 minutes, so you can just do that one immediately, and then you can grade the rest of them as you see fit. I'm going to do a very quick introduction of our four panelists, but as I think you'll soon find out, we have a terrific cross-section of specialists up here. And we've had conference calls ahead of time in terms of some broad-based topics to touch upon, but as much as possible, we would like to make this an interactive session. So I hope we've got the microphones and everything good to go in terms of questions once we go into this 45 minutes. So really going just from my far side all the way in, if you look at it, the investment banking world, regulatory and quality assurance, natural products, key account management, and sales. And without further ado, then I will let Slava kick off just a very quick introduction of yourselves, and then we'll go right into some of the at least high-level topics that we can touch upon, and then hopefully dig down deeper into some of these points that we're going to discuss today.
Thanks, Ed. Good morning, everybody. My name is Slava Lakend. I'm a managing director at a firm called Sawaya Partners, which is based in New York. We're an M&A advisory firm. We advise a cross-section of corporations, privately held companies, private equity firms, really across the consumer space broadly, although I help lead our consumer health practice, which is quite, I think, well known in North America and increasingly in Europe. We've been quite active in the space over the last 10 to 15 years. Some of our activity just in the past 12 to 15 months has included advising companies like J&J on a number of divestitures, two very recently, a brand called Anusol that we sold to Church & Dwight, another brand which is quite well known in Europe called Campide, which we sold to HRA Pharma. And then a number of transactions in the U.S. In the past year for businesses such as CB Fleet, which is owned by a well-known feminine care brand, Summer's Eve, Zicam, as well as helping carve out a business out of Teva, which was the Plan B business, the emergency contraceptive business, on the behalf of a private equity firm. So we live and breathe this space. Very excited to be here this morning with you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Alexis Roberts-McIntosh, and I'd first of all like to thank Nicholas and the team and the opportunity to be on the panel with such a great team. A little bit of background about myself. I've over 25 years experiences quality, regulatory, but really broadly R&D. And really the focus for myself for all the 25 years has been innovation and hopefully disruptive innovation as well. Big areas, mostly multinational, in fact, work mostly with multinationals. The brands that you may know about that I'm passionate, continue to be passionate about is Sensodyne, Advil, Durex, to name a few, and the vitamins and minerals and supplements. My passion and my commitment is actually to self-care. I've always focused on that, whether it was in pharma, RX, OTC, or medical device, and more recently in wellness. I'm going to persuade you that it's the perfect storm in self-care at this moment in time, and it's all about disruption and innovation. I would also like to reflect that actually I'm independent. I have worked with multinationals, but I'm now independent, and it's my own opinion.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Cooper, and I am a consultant that has primarily worked in the natural products industry. I've been in the industry for over 25 years, and actually I've worked for both nutraceutical companies and food companies and OTC companies where they have an interest in natural products, and depending on where they are in the world, of course, they may be OTCs or drugs, medical devices, or food supplements, medical foods, all of those categories. I've brought to market over 300 different products, and I'm also a believer in innovation and a believer in the Nicholas Hall dictum that we are at a tipping point. So.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Alex Parker, and I work currently for Johnson & Johnson, but I have been working in the pharmacy channel for many years. In fact, over 25 years, from Warner Lambert through Pfizer and then on to Johnson & Johnson. I have had in the past the experience of, in a major marketplace in Germany, setting up my own field force as a part of a multinational, putting it on the field, being faced with all the challenges that the pharmacy channel gives you. And latterly, I've moved on, and with my time in Johnson & Johnson, I'm now responsible across EMEA for their pharmacy go-to-market strategy. So I have quite a bit of experience in the area, and I'm hoping that you'll just feel comfortable to ask me any questions today. The only thing is I also have a health care disclaimer, and that is that I am about to leave Johnson & Johnson. So any views that I give you today are not a J&J officially stamped view. They're my own views on life. However, I think that, frankly, it's not going to be a manufacturer or product-based discussion this morning. It's going to be more about what are the trends. I would just take one last moment to thank you, Nicholas, and the team for a wonderful evening last night. It was just fantastic. Thank you very much indeed.
And also another public service announcement. We apologize for the people on the far sides. Unbeknownst to the Nicholas Hall team, some of the AV ability to see us was taken away prematurely this morning. So by toss of the coin, I'm actually going to start with my former colleague, in one of the different versions of Pfizer Consumer. We were actually, we overlapped for more than a few years. But I'll start with Alex in terms of presently, what are the most important channels if you're a brand owner in consumer healthcare? And then later on, we'll get into trends. But right now, today, where do you focus?
Okay, well, it's an excellent question because you mentioned the perfect storm. I think it's the perfect opportunity, actually. I do think, however, that if I go back all those 25 years when I started in the pharmacy channel, I said, look, this model is broken already. It's traditional, it's fragmented, it's not effective, and there is no long-term cost efficacy either for the pharmacist in all of this or for the manufacturer. So in the next 3 to 5 years, I can see change coming, and of course I was completely wrong. However, I'd like to just repeat that right now and say that in the next 3 to 5 years, I do see change coming, and hope 25 years I'm going to be around to say whether I'm right or wrong. I think the most important thing to understand for us in this room is that, yes, the pharmacy channel is very traditional. But if you look at any major company on the manufacturing side, they will tell you that, that you need to doctor detail, there are various other things that need to be done for products, but the pharmacy channel is critical. And at this particular point in its transition from where it's been to where it's going. All of the various lobbies in various marketplaces are beginning to realize that they have to look for advice. They need help. And manufacturers and suppliers can give that advice. So, major channel. Manufacturers themselves can't deal with that at this point because they're busy doing the traditional thing. So they also need to transition. And the two factors that are throwing a real curveball into the mix are digital, because that's made everyone feel uncomfortable. Nobody quite knows what to do with digital, whether it's a government or a manufacturer or indeed the channel itself. And the other thing is the economic downturn for the last 8 to 10 years. That has fundamentally changed what used to be an investment bank, which was a pharmacy, into something which is potentially a liability, because in many marketplaces, 30–40% of pharmacists are pretty much on the breadline. They really are not quite sure how they're going to evolve in the next little while. So pharmacy is the critical piece. Yes, chains are vital, but chains don't have, to be fair to them, the community feel that Petra was talking about yesterday. And I think that one of the things that we must get our arms around is how do we together help the pharmacy channel to actually move forward. Critical channel as we move into the next 10 years.
Great segue right to Jennifer on then if you're looking at where the innovation is coming from and what kind of innovation you think, particularly from your natural products world, is going to be the key driver for growth.
I think this is absolutely true, that pharmacy is changing. I also agree that it will be completely different than what it is today. And some of the innovation trends that we see are going to be opportunities for helping pharmacy adapt in a better way. And they impact OTCs and drug as well as supplements. So the idea of personalized medicine and personalized nutrition, there's a tremendous amount of debate on where the science is and are we ready, and some companies have outpaced maybe where the science is at today. But the reality is that this is the personalized experience is not something where you're going to wait for the science to evolve and there's a cliff or a finish line, and then we're all going to say, okay, now it's time to embrace personalized medicine. Right now, there's baby steps that we can take because personalized medicine or personalized nutrition involves more than just compounds and genetic analysis. It involves the type of service that you can only get in the pharmacy. It involves lifestyle and diet and advice that we haven't taken advantage of maybe as an industry, the ability to provide our products in the context of bigger lifestyle advice. And so that's going to be a really critical trend. And somebody who can crack the code on providing a personalized experience such as it exists today and evolve with the science, which is changing very, very quickly, you'll be ahead of the game, because that gives the pharmacy tools to bring people in and keep them coming back.
Thank you. Perfect segue. Here's somebody that's had to live, eat, and breathe it in a large company environment on the new product development side, from the QA and regulatory side. Describe your experiences over the last 5–10 years and how big companies are starting to adapt.
Well, I think the biggest thing that I've learned, and personally, is anybody know what VUCA means? VUCA? The situation, the environment you're going into is a volatile, uncertain, ambiguous environment. That gives great opportunity. And as long as you can continue to be pragmatic and keep the right key criteria in place, it gives you great opportunity. And let's face it, I'm going to focus a little bit on rest of world as opposed to Europe. So to really think about where the great opportunities are. And as Nicholas said yesterday, the growth is actually still there, providing you can be pragmatic and focused and have the right attitude to delivering the right innovation for the individual local needs of the market. But there's a couple of positive truths, I call them, that are really, really important that you need to reach into. Health provision, whether in Europe or rest of the world, is unsustainable as it currently is. That's the reality. Payers are looking to keep people healthy, in which it's cheaper to keep people healthy than to go into our mindset maybe of a Western situation of problem solution. Now, if you think about also the consumer in key markets around the world, the mindset is very much of wellness, of leading with naturals, and looking at ways in which some of the consumers that I've come across have been the most discerning actually in these markets in many, many of the key areas. They look beyond the pill. They look at early adoption. If you think of fintech, we heard the other day, consumers do not use your credit cards. They use phones, mobiles in Africa, in China, and in most of the Asian markets. It's really driving the whole fintech. So I would drive you guys to look at fintech first as the way that you can translate what's happening in fintechnology, financial technologies, as a way that we can leverage for how we deliver technology in the future. Then the other big disruptive area that you really need to piece as part of the ecosystem is the disruptive technology. Now, if you look at all the areas of wellness, which is critical to the rest of the world, and it's becoming a Western agenda as well, it's things like sleep, accurate measurement in heart rate, allows you to do many, many things. Driving obesity, well, if you can get sugar monitoring down to a low level first, you can actually prevent type 2 diabetes. We heard that too. It's the big agenda for the future. Such things as early monitoring, and the technology is there now. The regulation I'll talk about later, but there is absolutely the perfect storm and the perfect opportunity to really drive this forward, and that's where we need to lean into. And I would suggest to you that Asia and rest of the world is a big opportunity for you to really drive that forward with early adoption.
Thank you. I also would have to say, we'll jump now to the investment banking side of it. Being based in North America, I cannot think of a deal that Sawaya Partners has not been involved with over about the last 10 years at least in the consumer healthcare space. I mean, truly, this is a firm that for getting up to transactions that could be now numbered in the billions, but working in that middle market all the way up, the Sawaya Partners has seen basically almost every deal worth talking about. So we've talked about chaos and opportunity. Slava, who's buying?
Well, I think clearly the last 3 or 4 years have been incredibly active in the consumer healthcare space, including quite visible announcements even yesterday. But what's been most interesting is that really the combination of both the number and the scale of transactions in the last few years has really been unprecedented in consumer healthcare. It's a space that attracted a lot of capital, both from corporates and financial buyers. You've seen almost 15 transactions that have exceeded $500 million in enterprise value just in the last 3 years, and more than 10 of those have been in excess of $1 billion. And there have been a few contributing factors, among them being really strategic commitments to the consumer healthcare space on the part of large pharma. So you have a number of people that are making in and out type of chess moves, if you will, doubling down on their commitment or monetizing into an attractive valuation environment. So think GSK, Novartis, Bayer, Merck, Sanofi, BI, and as of yesterday, P&G, Merck, KGA. So you have that dynamic that's creating and unlocking opportunities. At the same time, you then have generic players who are looking to offset and mitigate some of the challenges that they're seeing on the generic side of their house and acquiring scarce regional portfolios, right? So think Mylan Meda, Perrigo, Omega Pharma here in Europe. Lastly, you have a growth environment, and Nicholas shared some of the data yesterday, but you have most companies of scale really delivering quite muted organic growth, right? So the top line growth that is being eked out by large consumer healthcare companies and frankly HPC companies is in the 1% to 2% at best, and more in the 0% range. Now, why is that? You know, when you have categories that, as Nicholas shared, are growing at 3, 4+%. Well, what has happened is the portfolios, certainly of the large consumer healthcare players, have become incredibly complex as those businesses have acquired companies and have scaled. And what you're seeing now is an incredibly long tail of non-core, if you will, brands that are weighing down those businesses.
Perhaps
Now,
an opportunity for buying and selling?
So how does that contribute to M&A? Well, what you've seen is a number of companies now refocus their effort on, you know, what are called core brands or mega brands. Even J&J has quite publicly articulated their strategy that, you know, they expect that, you know, their top 12 mega brands today represent 65% of their sales. Just think about that, top 12 brands of J&J, and they expect those top 12 to represent 75%. Now, what that means for the balance is that there's consistent pruning, right? So you've seen companies like J&J, you've seen companies like Sanofi be fairly consistent in the pruning activity of their portfolios, and other companies like Bayer and GSK be not as prolific in the portfolio rationalization. And that's what's created opportunity for then middle market consolidators as well as private equity firms. So you've seen a number of platforms being formed around corporate carve-outs and divestitures, and that's what's created opportunities for a big part of the market and has attracted quite a bit of capital.
Great. Okay, now we'll jump right back and we'll do another round, and then we're going to open it up. Alex, in terms of trends coming out in the future for key account management, for sales, I think near and dear to most everybody in the room would be, in particular, trade promotion trends and the like, no matter what channel we're talking about. What's your prediction for what's about to happen here?
Well, let me just come back to answer that. Let me come back on a couple of points that were made. You're absolutely right, Slava. We've seen this huge consolidation of the top of the manufacturing tree. Fewer companies, vast ranges, which field forces have got to deal with or key account managers have got to deal with. And it's become a real challenge. But it's also a massive opportunity for those smaller brands, which never got and are going to get the time of a major manufacturer. So small brands that are good brands were never bad brands, and they're still good, and they will be good in the future. So please don't underplay those. But what we do need to do is work out a way, and Petra Meyer said it so succinctly yesterday. We need to be really clear how we help the pharmacy, because remember, most of the pharmacies in our region, in EMEA at least, are independent pharmacies, and they need to be helped in terms of that workload, services, new things that they can confidently recommend and offer, and that includes brands as well as services. So key account management, what is a key account? We think of chains. We think of a Carrefour on one side, or a Boots, or a Benu on the other. It's different. This is different because for us as manufacturers, those key players, those key accounts in most of our markets across EMEA are actually the top 10% of the independent pharmacy trade, as well as any chains in the market. Furthermore, importantly, the wholesale trade will become more and more important. It has struggled in the last 3 to 5 years, big time because of margins. But as manufacturers focus on those key accounts at the top, then the services, the training that I was talking about, how you deal with products, distribution of new NPI, etc., distribution in total, needs to be dealt with down into the trade for the community so that they can all access the products that they need. So the wholesaler will see, I think, a bit of a resurgence in terms of how we as manufacturers deal with those. So all of those things are moving along, and I think it is incumbent upon us all to try to work out how do we give the pharmacist, the independent pharmacist, the important pharmacist in our world, the opportunity to understand the brand, market the brand and recommend it effectively, but not be swamped by 5, 6, 7 representatives coming through the door every day or wanting time with their staff, because you're not going to get it. We just need to think about how do we network more effectively to get our message across to the trade.
So for those of us keeping a P&L, trade promotion is going to be going up a bit?
Not necessarily, because again, as Slava said, you know, big companies are focusing a huge amount of their available resource on the top brands. So what does that mean for the smaller brand? Smaller brand is, remember, key in terms of the loyal user. They want to know more about the brand, they want to be able to get it. So trade promotion is necessarily going to have to be rethought. One thing is for sure, whoever the brand is, whether it's a J&J or a Bayer or anyone else, I can assure you there is not going to be an additional tap that we can all turn on for more funds. Ain't going to happen. So we just need to be far more effective in terms of ROI and programs together as we move forward with the trade and with the in-between steps.
Jennifer, let's do a deeper dive on the concept of personalization and how that fits into products that you're seeing and working with from the natural side.
Sure. I just want to comment on some of the comments and remind us yesterday as Nicholas was talking about one of the important things related to PACE and PACE itself. The digital world, for all of the we don't know what we're going to do with it and everything, and pharmacies don't know what to do with it, manufacturers don't know what to do with it. You know who knows what to do with it is the digital people. And they're defining the world for us instead of us defining what we want it to be. Those adjacent categories, because of the pruning and all of that, while they represent significant opportunity for growth, it's almost a self-fulfilling cycle or self-fulfilling prophecy, because you have a mega brand and some of these adjacent brands are only small when you're talking about in context of the mega brands at J&J, and they're side notes to the core business of these multinationals. And if they had the same attention and resources that a mega brand had, they would become mega brands. I would propose to you that there's mega brands lurking in the adjacent categories and in the natural product side, that if they had the kind of attention that we put on some of the other brands and that they weren't side businesses for them, that they could grow.
Totally agree.
That they could grow and there would be opportunity there. We're such a conservative group because one of the other reasons we focus on our mega brands, besides the fact that they're mega, is that they're familiar to us. They're monograph, a lot of them are monograph substances, and they fit the paradigm of the way we've always been doing business. And that paradigm is going to change whether we want to or not. We can keep selling ibuprofen, every major OTC consumer healthcare company, we can keep selling the same substances, or we can, and it gets scary because you start to look outside the monograph system at natural products and other alternatives, because I'm going to go way out on a limb to say this in Europe, but one of the areas that's going to be shocking in innovation and that's going to shift categories all over the planet is probiotics. And I say that even though it's a regulatory quandary in Europe, the technology that's evolving, if you overlay investment in the probiotic microbiome category and look at it at investment after the Human Genome Project got funded, and you overlay the increase in investment after we started sequencing the human genome, you're going to see some parallels to what's happening in the sequencing of the microbiome. And I would remind us that the microbiome category is so much bigger, or could be so much bigger, than just probiotics. You got struggles with probiotics on formulating and claims in Europe. There's diagnostics, there's probiotics as a delivery system. What if, as a delivery system, you could take one of your old substances and change its safety, its efficacy profile? Also, there's the prebiotic category. And anybody who can quit talking about prebiotic versus probiotic, because the consumer still doesn't really understand that language, and the literature and what we see in the science is that prebiotics may have more of an impact on being able to shift the human gut than even a probiotic. And the data is a lot cleaner and nicer from a regulatory standpoint, because we're not talking about living organisms. There's a lot there. I also think the area of chronobiology, that when we take stuff matters. We see this in drug right now, but the science is going to tell us that it matters when the time of day we eat. It matters when we take our other supplements. And also, what if you could apply the science and the new technology related to chronobiology also to old substances and to the monograph system? There's claims and there's intellectual property to be had in those, combining our traditional substances with new technology, including personalizing the experience. And I didn't really go into personalized medicine because I got going on other of my favorite topics.
Well, a perfect segue once again to Alexis, who has absolutely had to manage the regulatory aspects of what I would argue is our traditional framework. And what have you lived through in terms of then getting to the claims that we would all want to have and getting through the regulatory bodies around the world? What are the trends that you have lived through, and where do you see things going for a big company to try to handle this?
Sure. I think to build on this, I've been in the situation where I've been given regulatory advice from a probiotic that's been an NDA in one environment and as simple as a supplement in the other. And actually managing that and building a framework that you can deliver that through is a challenging but opportunity call. So really lean into that in that context, because actually I would also say that would all say to all of you, if you look at rest of world, I'm not a regulatory expert. What I would encourage you to do is have a local, pragmatic individual in your regulatory team that has a clear path to understanding the local regulatory, because there's such, we'll talk about harmonization in a minute, but there's still such local national drivers in each of the markets that we work on and we want to engage in, that it's so important that you recognize that and work in that way. So very, very important. That's a health warning from me, straight off. Do think about building that in. But there are some basic big themes to be aware of. Again, thinking rest of world, and requirements that are absolutely fundamental. We heard about some of them yesterday. And then I want to share a little bit about the status of harmonization. So let's talk about the big themes. Big themes in this new world of VUCA is all really still about safety. Let's not, it's about putting the right products for the right requirements. And let's also be clear, the biggest drivers in each of these rest of world markets potentially is about the traditions and the healthcare needs of those individual markets, and the culture, and also how society sees self-care and the cost of self-care in each of those markets. very, very fundamental. The role of the pharmacist, the role of the doctor, and the role of the guru. It absolutely, whichever market you go into, as we would want to do, has to be evidence-based. Absolutely has to be evidence-based. And that evidence base needs to be potentially in that population. So in China, you absolutely have to do clinical trials in a Chinese population. In Korea and Japan also as well. So be aware that you might want to do China first work, rather than thinking about it from a more traditional, I'll do from the US or I'll do from again, really, that's a big driver. Also thinking about patient and consumer advocacy is a big driver, how it shapes regulation and how it drives regulation in each of the markets. And then obviously, a lot of it to do with it is about trade and also freedom to operate and freedom to go across borders. That's a very, very important driver in regulatory. So from our point of view, the requirements are still going to be the same. We talk about digital, we talk, in my experience, it's all been about learning about data protection. It's still making sure that you're clear when you're making or not making a diagnosis. What does that mean in the traditional sense? Be aware that you might actually be collecting, whether you think you are or not, adverse events when you're going into digital space. And what do you do about that? Very, very important. And then there's the classic things like permitted ingredients. Permitted ingredients are very different depending on which market you're in. China's got a very different profile from somewhere else. And the data required is very individualistic as well. And the channels, we see the strength of Ali Health with Alibaba. Huge big opportunity there, huge big drivers, and that is really transforming how we bring digital products to market. The claims are very different. So probiotics, I mentioned. What you want to make in a claim, if you want to make some claims, it's an NDA in one market and it's a supplement in another. Branding is very different. Depending which market you're in, it can be your sub-branding cannot be done. So branding is a very local requirement, and sub-branding, you might get in with a global aspect, how you want to talk about Sensodyne. You might not, or one of the J&J products, you might not be able to do that. The biggest thing that I'm seeing is the real driver for harmonization. It's a big journey, but what I am seeing is most advances I've actually seen is in the South Asia markets. 10 countries, 10 different languages, and they are driving, because of barriers to freedom to trade, really driving mutual recognition, common dossiers, which is fantastic. But the overriding thing is they still, at a national level, have the decision-making at national level in interests of the individual nation. So that's a big thing, but I've seen significant work there. In actually African environments, what I've seen is people like Bill Gates' group have actually been helping frame South Africa is the biggest driver in that region, but I've also seen how framing it from basic access to health, and so it's about public health decisions. And similarly in LATAM and Pan America, it's all about bringing the capabilities of each of those markets up to drive Brazil's through the big drivers of Brazil and Mexico. Mexico is recognizing that if it can take dossiers from the US, it can look at mutual recognition and apply and drive a Mexican registration that way. So my point is harmonization is still a journey, but I think the self-care agenda is really going to drive that because of trade management, cost of health will really drive those regulatory positions in the future. It sounds complicated, stick in, it's worth it. There's so much more opportunity to drive and to grow health in these markets.
Super. Slava, we've obviously added prebiotics and probiotics to your potential shopping list as you're going to start to then study going forward. But a general question would be, what have you seen in terms of trends on the multiples of all the M&A activity over these last 18 to 24 months, and where do you see it going?
It's a good question. I think anyone who is invested in any asset today appreciates that it's a premium valuation environment that certainly applies to the consumer healthcare space. In consumer healthcare, and certainly the way that we look at it, you really have to segment transactions by the nature of the asset, the scarcity of the asset. So is it a market share moving transaction, right? Are you buying a once in a lifetime, $2 billion OTC portfolio? Or is it a single brand that has a specific niche? Or is it a portfolio of brands that creates an entry point, usually for a private equity firm, to pursue a build-up thesis? So you have to apply that lens, and then you have to apply the lens of who the buyer is and what their capabilities are and the synergy value that they're able to bring to a specific opportunity. That confluence, creates ultimately what people read in the headlines as a transaction multiple or a transaction value. So we continue to see quite heady valuations, certainly for the market share moving transactions. So with yesterday's announcement of P&G's acquisition of the Merck business, that was a transaction that was priced at 21 times EBITDA with no synergies. And that is akin to Bayer's acquisition of the other Merck consumer business, and in their case, they did have synergies. So you continue to see that level being tested for those types of transactions. For single scale brands, typically today you see quite a bit of scarcity value for anything that is of scale and performing. So scale brands that generate anywhere from between 25 million in revenue to 100 million in revenue continue to trade in excess of 5 times sales. And we've handled a number of those situations just in the past 12 months. Now you have to, in those situations, always look at the contribution margin and the margin profile of that business. But that's where you've seen things trade. Now where you've seen most escalation, I would say, over the last several years relative to maybe 5 or 10 years ago, is in the value of portfolios. So if you think about brand portfolios, that may be an entry point for a private equity firm. So think of it as maybe a 50 million revenue portfolio of 5 or 6 different brands that are quite stable, generate very attractive margin and profitability. Whereas 5 to 10 years ago, those types of portfolios would trade to a private equity firm at 7 to 8 times EBITDA. Today they're trading at 10 times plus. And part of that is the pricing in, if you will, of the M&A thesis, right? So those firms go into the investment pricing in their ability to continue to build those platforms. So the return that they're assuming by paying more upfront is dependent on their ability to create value through additional M&A. And you've seen a number of success stories and value creation case studies over time that have proven that out, that have now attracted a lot more capital into the space, certainly in Europe, with a number of large funds supporting companies like Stada, supporting companies like HRA Pharma, Trim, and Cooper Vimedia, and you have the equivalent in North America. I think that's where we've seen really an unprecedented participation in the space.
Great. Alex, I feel like we got sold off cheap when we were at Pfizer Consumer.
Absolutely.
I mean, we were undervalued at least
21 times value.
Yeah. We were what, 8 or 9?
Yeah.
How much time do we have for questions?
We're out.
2 questions. Who are the lucky 2 contestants today? Questions? We cannot have covered everything. Here we go.
Okay. Thank you very much for those really excellent key messages, so concentrated on the point. Mrs. McIntosh, is right, McIntosh? I would like to ask you, yes, it is absolutely clear that those personalized services will be the road to success for pharmacies, or the road to survive. My question concerning this audience is how to start this process. It sounds brilliant, but there has to be a strategy to implement for the pharmaceutical industry, a starting point, milestones, and a clear strategy. How to start that? What's
Hire
the
millennials?
kickoff?
I don't know. you guys.
I did mention, I mean, it's looking at other industries is actually a good way to start. The fin industry, the financial industry, has to deal with the same requirements as protection, safety. Look at those. That's been an inspiration for me in working with teams to understand how to bring a sexual wellness digital product to market, how to look at pollution, and basically building the framework and bringing the talent of digital experts to the table. It's not one discipline that will make this happen, but look for ways and frameworks that are already happening in places like China and places like Africa, actually, because of that. So I would encourage you to look at the inspiration and look at what still the requirements that we have of safety, innovation. Really, I mean, the biggest thing that you learn is it's got to have meaning to the consumer. People just say that must be digital. You know, everything in innovation has to be digital now. Well, if it's not relevant, it's not value add. I think that's got to be the heart of how you actually drive that forward, and that's been certainly my inspiration to do that. And bringing the framework and sticking to it, and a vision of what you're actually going to deliver of value add to a consumer.
One more, and then I will keep myself close to my allotted time frame, as Nicholas reminded.
Good morning. Thank you to the panel. I have a question that I would like everybody to address, but it's not, maybe time doesn't allow. I work for a private-owned company called Karma. We are called the US in a stick. The other day I was in France, they say, you are US in a stick. It's one of the mid-small company, like Slava was saying, in the 100 million range. One brand company, not 10, 12 brands that make 75%,
Yeah.
which is doing extremely well. By the way, we're considering increasing the factory and so on. But still, sometimes it's a problem to have relevance because you are a one brand company, and pharmacy don't want to see salespeople for a little brand of top of a product that is 2, 3, 4 euro. We are not on sale, so sorry for Slava, we are not on sale, but any recommendation, any suggestion, what do you think we should do to stay relevant in the world environment? Thank you.
I'm going to recuse myself since I worked on that brand for 4 or 5 years, so I'm going to let the others.
I'll just make one comment and then anyone else can jump in. The issue is not just for you, the issue is for many, many, as we've said, fantastic brands out there that really need to be getting face time with the pharmacy and the pharmacy staff so that actually your job is to get it in there, explain it, etc. We've talked about IT or digital in many ways. We've touched on it. I am the biggest believer that the only way that you can reach the number of people you need to reach effectively is to do it by embracing IT. Cost-wise, I can assure you that having someone go through a door, unless you can syndicate effectively, is going to be a massive challenge. But nothing is better than face-to-face, but the next best thing is absolutely excellent IT execution. And I do believe that that is the way forward. We've looked at it for a number of years, and I have to tell you that I'm absolutely certain that that's the future.
Super. Well, I'd like to thank the panel, and we will do a quick transition to our next speaker. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.